Have you ever caught your child's gaze and felt a pang, realizing their heart was quietly shattering, but they couldn't put words to the pain? I'm Amelia, a single mom who always thought I had my son figured out, until one crisp fall evening when Ethan looked at me and said, "Mom, I'm not sure who I am anymore." This isn't a tale with big, dramatic moments or sobbing confessions, just quiet pauses, warm hugs without words, and a slow path to finding ourselves, together. If you've ever felt adrift in your own house or longed for someone to truly hear you without judging, stick with me. That late autumn day, I pulled the car onto a narrow road that stretched toward the ocean. The sky glowed with the gentle gold of a fading sunset. A soft breeze wove through the casuarina trees, their leaves drifting down like whispers of the season's end. The air carried the salty tang of the sea, mixed with a strange sense, like old memories stirring from some far-off place. I stepped out of the car, tugging my wool scarf tighter around my neck. I glanced at Ethan, my 24-year-old son, sitting quietly in the passenger seat, his eyes fixed on some distant point. Those eyes used to sparkle with a child's curiosity, now they were still, shadowed by something I couldn't quite name. "We made it," I murmured, almost to myself, my voice soft in the quiet air. Ethan gave a small nod, his lips tight, then pushed open the door and grabbed his backpack, the one that always held his camera, his lifeline to art, where he found a way to exhale. The little seaside cottage peeked out from behind the weathered trees. It looked tired but still clung to a cozy charm from years past. Back when Ethan was little, this was our summer haven, a place where our family made memories every year. But that was ages ago. Michael, my husband, got too caught up in work to join us, and Ethan, after heading off to college, slowly slipped out of reach. I pushed open the creaky wooden door, letting sunlight flood the quiet living room. "It still smells like it always did," I said with a small grin, nostalgia tugging at my heart. Ethan nodded, setting his backpack in a corner without a word. That evening, the tiny kitchen hummed with gentle clinks and clatters. I prepared rosemary grilled fish, Ethan's favorite from when he was a boy, moving with calm, familiar motions. Ethan sat at the table, fiddling with his camera settings, lost in his own world. "Do you still love the ocean?" I asked softly, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked up, his eyes warming just a bit. "I'm not sure, but I miss how it felt to sit with you by it." I froze for a moment, then turned to face him, catching a glimpse of the little boy who used to beg for one more story before bed. But the moment faded, and a heavy quiet settled back over his face. After dinner, we settled on the long bench outside, gazing at the sea. The moon climbed slowly, painting the waves with a silvery shimmer. A soft silence stretched between us, not awkward, but comforting, like a shared breath. "Ethan," I said gently, "why'd you want to come back here now?" He stayed quiet, the breeze ruffling his slightly too long hair, carrying a faint sigh. "Can you just listen to me tonight, just for one evening?" His words were quiet but hit me like a tender ripple, stirring something deep in my chest. I turned to him, seeing raw honesty in his eyes, exhaustion, uncertainty, and a quiet plea for help. I didn't push with questions, I just nodded softly. "Tonight, I'm all ears, just for you." Ethan held my gaze for a long moment, then a small smile broke through, his first since we got here. Warmth bloomed in my heart, soft and steady. I didn't know what he'd share, but I knew he didn't need my advice right now, just a safe, quiet space to let his heart speak. And me, Amelia, the woman who'd held this family together through long, lonely stretches, felt a tiny door creak open in my own heart. This trip wasn't about me guiding my son or fixing things, it was about us finding our way back to each other through a talk that came late, but not too late. That night, the seaside cottage settled into a peaceful hush. The breeze slipped through the wooden window frame, nudging the sheer curtain like a memory breathing softly. I brewed 2 mugs of chamomile tea, my hands shaking just a little, not from the chilly air, but from a quiet sense of what was coming. Ethan sat on the old couch, wrapped in a wool coat, his eyes distant. When I set the tea on the table, he glanced at my hands, hands that had cared for him all these years, now trembling like they did when I first held him as a new mom. "I used to believe," Ethan said after a long pause, "that if I kept quiet long enough, my problems would sort themselves out. I didn't jump in with words, I just sat near him, not too close, giving him space to breathe. But I learned silence only widens the gap, he went on, his voice thick with feeling. I hid things from you, not because I didn't trust you, but because I was scared you'd be let down. The wind outside picked up, tapping lightly at the old frame, but in that small room, Ethan's words echoed clearly. I wrapped my hands around my mug, letting its warmth anchor the emotion swirling inside me. I always thought you were so strong, Ethan said, meeting my gaze. So I felt like I had to be too tough, put together, perfect. But the harder I tried, the more I felt like I didn't fit anywhere. I looked away, tears blurring my vision, not because he was pointing fingers, but because he was finally letting me into his heart. Ethan, I whispered, the last thing I ever wanted was for you to feel you had to be someone else. All I've ever wanted is for you to be you, even if that means being lost, overwhelmed, or fragile. He pressed his lips together, nodding softly, like he was finally letting out a breath he'd held for years. Do you remember when I left for the city? He asked. You gave me that big smile and said, take care of yourself, wherever you go. But that first night in the dorm, I cried like a kid. I reached over, resting my hand on his, the touch saying everything I didn't need to put into words. It wasn't fear that made me cry, he said quietly. It was feeling the space between us and missing you so much, scared I'd never be able to tell you what was really in my heart. My voice softened to a hush. But you're telling me now. Ethan looked at me, his eyes damp and tender. Because I couldn't bear the thought of you sitting alone one day, not knowing I was lost too. We sat in silence, the tea cold now, but a gentle warmth growing between us. Nothing miraculous happened, no quick fix erased the pain, but that night in the little seaside house, two hearts found the courage to bridge the quiet and meet halfway. I gave Ethan's hand a gentle squeeze. For the first time in ages, I didn't feel like I had to be the strong mom all the time. I felt like a mom who could be vulnerable, heard, and welcomed into the quiet world of her son's heart. And in the calm between the ocean breeze and the moonlight's silver glow, something small and precious started to mend. The cozy living room glowed softly under the warm yellow light. The corner lamp's gentle beams threw faint shadows across the light brown walls, wrapping the room in a comforting embrace, like a shawl around my shoulders. The tea on the table had gone stone cold, but Ethan and I hadn't budged. Right then, words weren't necessary, just sitting together felt like a safe haven, a place where Ethan could finally peel off the tough facade he'd worn for too long. Mom, did you ever guess? Ethan started, his voice catching a bit. When I was in the city, there were days I could barely drag myself out of my room. I turned to him slowly, my heart skipping a beat at his words. I kept it to myself, Ethan said with a tired half-smile. Every morning, I'd wake up drained, wondering, is there even a point to getting up today? Then I'd just sink back into quiet. I nodded slightly, a knot forming in my chest. It wasn't about hating school or my buddies, Ethan went on. It was more like I couldn't see where my life was headed. Those words cut deep, striking right at a mother's heart. I was raised to work hard, do good, be kind, but the more effort I put in, the more I felt like I didn't even know myself. I whispered, and you didn't tell me because... I was scared, Ethan shot back quickly. Scared you'd fret over me. You were already carrying so much. The room settled into a soft rhythm of our breaths. I reached over, resting my hand gently on his. Ethan, I don't want a perfect son. I just want one who's honest with me. Ethan's lips tightened, his voice breaking as he said, sometimes I thought stepping back from everything might let me breathe easier. My heart squeezed tight. All those years I was caught up, piecing together our fragile home, I hadn't noticed my son slipping into shadows. I didn't speak up because I couldn't find the words. That emptiness, it's not something you can pin down. It's just a haze, and the more I wrestled with it, the more lost I got. I stayed quiet, tears slipping down my cheeks without me realizing. You don't need to label it, Ethan, I said gently. Just let it exist, like you're doing now, right here. Ethan glanced at me, his eyes red but steadier, less clouded. I was terrified of seeming weak, he murmured. terrified of being a burden. I cut in, soft but firm, being my son, you could never be a burden. If you're hurting, I need to know, that's what makes me your mom. In that moment, it felt like a small door cracked open in Ethan's heart. No more practiced excuses, no more acting like everything was fine, he was just himself, a 24-year-old finding his way back to the light with the steady hand of a mom he thought was out of reach. In that little room, in the heart of fall, there was no criticism, no pushy advice, just two people learning how to hear each other again. For Ethan, that alone was a good place to start. I poured more tea into my mug, even though it was cold as ice. I didn't really need another sip, my hands just needed something to fidget with to keep me from unraveling. Ethan sat beside me, silent, his fingers woven together, rubbing slowly like he was trying to untie some hidden tangle. "Mom," he whispered, his voice cutting through the stillness, "there were so many times I grabbed my phone, ready to call you." I turned to him, my pulse quickening. When everything felt like too much, I just wanted to hit pause on life and find some calm, Ethan said, staring at some far-off point. I wondered, if I call Mom now, will she get it, or will she just tell me to push harder, to tough it out? That question stopped me cold. "I always saw you as so strong," Ethan said, dropping his gaze. "You raised me alone, never grumbled, never fell apart. You were always solid, and I was scared I'd let you down if I admitted I wasn't okay." A lump rose in my throat. I never thought my strength could feel like a wall between us. "Ethan," I said softly, giving his hand a gentle squeeze, "being strong doesn't mean you can't feel weak sometimes." He went quiet. "I was strong because I had no choice," I continued, my voice low. "But I've had my moments of falling apart, I just hid them from you." A tear slid onto the back of my hand, and I couldn't tell if it was mine or Ethan's, maybe it was both of ours. "I'm sorry," I whispered, "for making you think you couldn't hurt or be worn out." Ethan started to cry, not with big sobs, but with the soft release of someone who'd held it all in for too long. He leaned his head on my shoulder, like when he was little and sick or scared from a bad dream. I wrapped my arms around him, not to hold him in place, but to let him know these arms were still here, no matter how old he got. "Some feelings run so deep they're hard to name, don't they?" Ethan asked, his voice shaky. I nodded gently. "They do, but once you say them out loud, they're not just a quiet wound anymore." In that small room, the clocks ticking mingled with our slow, steady breaths. No one tried to wipe away the pain or rush to patch it up. There was just us, sitting with it, knowing you don't have to be flawless to be loved. For Ethan, it was the first time in forever that he felt truly unburdened. Night crept in, casting gentle shadows across the old wooden walls of the hillside cottage. The November breeze from the valley carried a chill, softly rattling the window panes. In the living room, the corner lamp spilled warm light, bathing the space in a familiar, comforting glow. I stood in the kitchen, wiping the teacups again, even though they were already spotless. After talking with Ethan, part of me felt lighter, but another part wobbled, unsure. No one hands you a guidebook for being a mom in moments like these. How do you tell your kid, "You don't have to be tough for me. I just want you to be real"? I heard soft steps behind me. I turned to see Ethan, now in his pajamas, hair messy from a quick shower. His eyes held a quiet hesitation. "I was gonna head to bed early," he said, staring at his feet, "but somehow, I feel like I can't catch my breath." I didn't say anything right away, just nodded toward the couch for him to sit. "Sometimes, just sitting in the quiet is a way to breathe," I said, my voice light as a whisper. We sat side by side, not touching, but the space between us felt wrapped in a soft warmth. "Mom," Ethan said softly, "I don't need you to have all the solutions. Just having you listen is enough." I looked at my 24-year-old son, the same boy who used to clutch his stuffed bear on every road trip. Now he was a young man carrying scars and questions about who he was, and he'd chosen me to open up to. I didn't hesitate. I reached out and pulled Ethan into a tight hug, no words, no strings attached, just a mom's embrace for a son who needed a place to rest. Ethan stayed quiet, resting his head on my shoulder, his breath slowly easing into a calmer rhythm. You're allowed to feel worn out, I whispered softly. It's okay if everything feels like a jumble, and I'll still be right here. You don't need to have it all figured out. Just know this, you don't have to face those dark nights by yourself. Ethan squeezed me tighter. Mom, he murmured, I wish I'd opened up sooner. I smiled, tears blurring my eyes. It's all right, sweetheart. Now is plenty soon enough. Outside, the breeze stirred the last of the season's leaves, but in that room, our hearts were starting to warm again. We didn't need fixes or wisdom, just to sit side by side, knowing there was a space where we could be ourselves, free from judgment, expectations, or the fear of being left behind. The next morning, soft sunlight poured through the kitchen window, bathing the dining table in a warm, golden glow, like a drizzle of honey. I woke early, not out of routine, but because my mind hadn't fully settled after last night, still holding the comforting weight of Ethan's heartfelt hug. Though my heart wasn't completely at ease, something felt different, like a veil of distance between us had finally lifted. As I set the kettle on the stove, Ethan shuffled in, hair messy, wearing a faded gray t-shirt. Morning, Mom. I turned, caught off guard to see him up first. Morning, honey. You look a bit brighter today, I said with a small smile, my voice still laced with caution. I actually got some sleep, Ethan said with a light shrug, then grabbed bread and eggs from the fridge. I'm making breakfast today. I froze for a second. It had been ages since I'd seen him step up like that, not because he had to, but because he wanted to share the moment. I sat quietly, watching him fumble around the kitchen with that familiar awkwardness. I'm not sure I'm all fixed yet, Mom, Ethan said slowly, flipping the eggs in the pan, but at least I know now I'm not on my own. I gripped my ceramic mug a little tighter, his simple words flooding my heart with a warmth I could barely put into words. The table was set, nothing fancy, just toast, sunny-side-up eggs, and some fruit slices, but to me, it felt like a meal woven with love. We ate in silence, not because it was heavy, but because we didn't need to fill the air with words. We were figuring out how to just be with each other again, no pressure, no hurry. After breakfast, Ethan started washing the dishes while I stepped onto the porch. The trees out front were shedding their leaves, creating a serene autumn picture. When Ethan came out to join me, I turned and asked, Feel like a walk today, maybe around the hill, just to soak in some fresh air? He paused, then nodded. Yeah, that sounds good. I smiled, knowing that pain and scars don't vanish overnight, but as long as we kept moving forward together, tomorrow could be a little brighter. That afternoon, as the sunlight slanted softly over the hills blanketed in golden leaves, Ethan and I wandered along the dirt path near the house, the same trail we used to roam when he was a curious kid bursting with questions. The air was still, scented with faint traces of rotting wood and dried herbs. We walked at an easy pace, the only sound the crunchy rustle of leaves under our shoes. I remember you spinning fairy tales on this path, Ethan said, his voice carried by the breeze. I smiled gently. And I remember you always asking, why doesn't the princess just save herself instead of waiting for some prince? Ethan let out a soft chuckle. Because I didn't think anyone would come rescue someone who wasn't ready to stand up on their own. We walked quietly for a bit, then Ethan spoke, his words slow and careful. I think it's time I shared some things I've kept to myself. I glanced at him, giving a gentle nod. I'm right here, always. Ethan took a deep breath. Truth is, I don't love the major I'm in. I picked it for Dad and because I thought it'd make you proud. I didn't cut in, I just listened, letting his words settle. I want to do something more creative, something that feels alive. I didn't tell you because I was scared you'd think I was letting you down, or quitting halfway. I stopped walking, resting my hand on his shoulder. Ethan, all I've ever wanted is for you to live true to who you are. Whether you're strong or unsure, thriving or wandering, my love for you doesn't change. His voice trembled. I also felt this weight being your son, someone who always seemed so steady, so capable of anything. I was caught off guard for a moment, then softened. But you know, the one thing I never quite pulled off was admitting when I was exhausted. You just did that, and that's braver than any degree. Ethan bowed his head, his eyes glistening. We paused under a chestnut tree, its leaves drifting down, sunlight filtering through the branches and dancing across his dark hair. Mom, if I pick a different road one day, one you didn't imagine for me, will you still be there? I squeezed his hand, my brown eyes warm with quiet conviction. I'll be there, not just when you cross the finish line, but for every step along the way. Those words felt like a warm embrace in spoken form. Ethan didn't say more, just looked up at the sky, now deepening to a rich burnt orange. His gaze seemed lighter, as if a heavy weight he'd carried for years had finally been set free. One quiet weekend morning, I woke earlier than usual. Soft sunlight slipped through the white curtains, casting a warm, honey-like glow across the small kitchen. Next to the old teapot I'd had for years, I found a neatly folded note tucked under my favorite teacup, written in Ethan's familiar handwriting. To Mom. I'm not great with words like this, but some things need to be written to hold forever. Thank you, Mom, not for showing me how to be tough, but for being the one place I could feel safe letting my guard down. Thank you for that night when you didn't say a word, just sat with me in the quiet, letting me cry without needing reasons, holding me like you did when I was little, with no expectations, no demands. I used to think you'd only be proud if I made it big, but now I see you love me not for what I do, but for who I am. Wherever life takes me, whatever I try, however many times I stumble, knowing you're there gives me the strength to get back up. Your son, Ethan. Amelia set the letter down, unable to hold back her tears. But this time, those tears didn't come from sadness. They came from gratitude, from relief, because after all the silence, all the sleepless nights, all the moments she doubted how to be a mother the right way, in the end, she and Ethan had found their way back to each other, not just as mother and son, but as two souls who understood, who had grown together in a love without conditions. That kind of love doesn't need to be perfect. It doesn't need grand declarations. Sometimes, all it takes is sitting together in the dark, a small letter beneath a teacup, and a simple sentence, I love you just because you are you.